That's when my eyes gave up. Like everything, my whole body just disintegrated.
Yeah, you became a skeleton.
Yeah, but I learned a bunch of stuff.
You can always get your muscles back later.
Butterscotch Shenanigans.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 161 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast, Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam and my visual field is obstructed by a giant microphone.
I'm Sam and I make art.
And this is a show where we talk about life, business, and working in the games industry. Today is Julie Toothy, 2018. Mm-hmm. Before we get started, we have a warning. Anything can happen in this show. There's going to be profanity and just other stuff that babies and children either shouldn't hear or don't want to hear.
There'll be stuff about object permanence, stuff about standing, stuff about using bathrooms.
It's
long-term episodic memory.
Just
all
kinds of
It's things kids don't want to know, but they need to know.
Yeah.
If you want to age real quick, stick around.
Yeah, you're going to have a bald spot in the back of in the top middle back part of your head.
Top middle back part.
Is there a name for that?
Specific.
For that?
Isn't that the crown?
I think it's the crown.
Crown, the top middle back.
How come the crown isn't just where the crown goes?
That's your whole head.
I think it used to. They used to have little tiny crowns that just sat on the crown of your head.
The problem is they kept falling off because you had to hold your head downward at a 30-degree angle.
It's the price of nobility, you know?
Yep. You could always tell a king because they had a horrible neck problem, back then.
Holding that crown. Heavy is the head that wears the crown, especially when it's tiny and on the back of your middle back head.
As the saying goes. Also, before we get started with the episode, we'd like to thank those who have given us money via tips.bscotch.net.
Thanks.
So that's helps to support the podcast, which we appreciate. So we want to thank Philip Bear 93, Hot Claw, Horace, and Satellite. So I want to take a moment to say that, the fact that a satellite stopped orbiting for a moment
to beam us some cash.
To beam some cash down.
But which one, though?
Probably Hubble.
I think it was Hubble.
Or the moon, which is a satellite.
That's true.
Mm-hmm.
So they didn't even say it was an Earth satellite. It could have been any.
Could have been
satellite.
Ganymede.
Yeah. Io.
We don't know.
Planetary bodies are big fans. Big fans of the podcast.
And also we've been internally debating whether or not the URL tips.bscotch.net is confusing because maybe people who want tips for how to play the games might go there thinking they're going to get, some
or who want to send us some tips.
They're like, here's some news.
Here, I got some tips for you guys about how to do better good games.
Yep. Which we definitely don't want to hear.
Yeah, so we thought we need to make a more sort of clear and understandable URL for people to donate.
We had a good discussion last week about this too.
And so
we wanted to be very professional, just very easy to remember, just all those.
So it needs to check all those boxes. So we have a new URL, which is moneygrab.bscotch.net.
So if you want to let us grab some of your money in exchange for, listening to the podcast, then you got
or not even an exchange because you can listen to it for free if you want to. But as we all know, podcasts are the ultimate in the long con. You just record hundreds and hundreds of hours of audio.
Yep.
Boom.
Buy $1,000 of equipment.
You're a billionaire. Just like that overnight. All right, let's get on to some news. First of all, Adam is leaving for a couple weeks.
For a moment.
Yeah. So I'm starting to get abandonment issues because every 2 weeks somebody is gone for 2 weeks.
To be fair, you started it though.
It's true
because you were gone for basically 2 weeks. Because you were here but not here because you had family in town, and then you were gone.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
And 2 weeks after that, Sam was gone, and now I'm leaving.
Just like most deep-seated issues, it
starts from you.
It starts inside. You got to fix yourself.
You got to fix yourself.
You can handle.
So this is just in response.
Yeah.
So Adam is going.
This is my revenge.
Adam is going on a revenge-cation.
Yeah. Which I always like revenge stories. I'm just really.
Do you want to talk about this trip? Where you're going? What you're going to see?
I'll probably talk about it when I get back.
Okay.
Because
we're going to.
I kind of know what's going to happen when I go there, but it's not very interesting until I have some stories to tell when I get back. I assume.
Take
even
good
then it might not be interesting.
Take good notes.
I will take spectacular.
Take copious notes. Also, let's talk about Levelhead.
Okay.
Some stuff has happened this past week that I am very excited about. Basically, every few days of development, something happens, and then we go, oh my God, this is a game changer. This changes everything.
I think Seth has screamed this changes everything.
About
At least every
day.
4 days
Yeah.
during development.
Yeah.
Especially the past couple weeks.
Yeah.
So there's something that has been always kind of in the back of our mind about Levelhead that we've been worried about, which is that, yeah, it's a fun platformer, but if all you can do is run and jump and, jump on enemies and stuff, it feels like there's just not quite enough interaction points with things in the world to make it really compelling.
Well, because all you can say about it is, this is a really good platform.
It's a good platformer, feels good, good physics. And we added all these puzzle elements like switches and things into the game, but it was also kind of hard to make puzzles out of them sometimes because of just how sort of monolithic the number of things that the player can do is.
Well, you always have to be touching stuff.
Yeah.
That's the rule of platforming.
Yeah.
Right?
And so our first attempt at kind of solving that was adding push blocks, where we said, yeah, we want like objects in the environment that you can push around, and then with a push block you can use it to elevate yourself, so you can like push it somewhere and then jump off of it, or you can push it onto a pressure plate, and those were basically the two things that you could do with it. And push blocks also had the added problem that you can only push them; they're not pull blocks. I mean, come on, right?
So you have that problem, which happens in a lot of sort of puzzly games, where you can have these corner issues where
things get stuck.
Yeah, if you push a push block into a corner, since you can't pull it for arbitrary reasons, then you can't get it out.
And since you can't lift it, then if you push it down a level, then
it's just down there now.
And so it's got the sort of
it's very constrained.
Yeah, it always goes to like the corners and downward in the worst way possible if you mess up.
And so
But then also because they could be anywhere, because they weren't necessarily adhered to the grid like everything else was.
Yeah.
Then now there was an issue that Seth had when trying to make a good performance tweaks for the game where stuff would despawn off screen or whatever, because now he would have to actually know exactly, to the fraction of a pixel where
because push blocks would be fully solid, which means it really matters where they are, right? So we kind of had this in the back of our mind of like, this is something that we need to solve, but we never quite saw the solution. So last week we added this grabbing mechanic where you can hit a little button and then you just pick stuff up. So what did we add? We added the ability to pick up a friend in multiplayer. We removed pushing entirely, and you can now pick up a push block. So now it's a throw block.
Right.
So the block, so you can stack it on to other blocks, which you couldn't do before. You can hurl it across a gap. You can carry it to new areas of the level.
Take it with you, which is nice.
You take it with you, and you do all kinds of cool stuff with it. And so that all of a sudden blew the lid off of what we could do. So then we added bombs that you can pick up and throw, and then we added bomb generators, and you can do stuff like hide bombs inside of blocks and stuff. So you could, as the player, you never know what you're going to find as you travel through the level. You may break a breakable block, boom, a bomb comes out. Now you can pick that up and throw it at an enemy to, blow them up, or you can throw it at a friend and launch them across the level. So all of a sudden with this grab mechanic, there's just the level. I felt like the game finally just really opened up.
Yeah, and we've been waiting for whatever that thing was actually for a while now, because it's been the case that the addition of in a game like this, the addition of say power-ups or new enemies or even new platforms and things that move in a different way, they're always very interesting because it's almost like building an alphabet, right? It's like, or more like building a dictionary, I guess. So the more words you have, even if you have a constrained number of letters, you start having this really generative just explosion happen. But if you don't have certain concepts in place to be able to build certain words at all, like what if you just don't have the ability to make verbs?
Yeah,
which is kind of, sort of the comparison. Then you can still convey a lot of stuff, but you're going to be missing, or at least you're not necessarily going to have some level of depth to certain things. So the nice thing and the weird thing I think about from a design standpoint about thrown objects in a platformer or grabbed objects in a platformer is essentially that what it does is it transfers, in a platformer, all you can do is move the player. And if you can also then move these objects in some way, then you essentially have these extensions of the player that then end up bouncing around the screen with all their own behaviors of their own sorts. Like we have springs, for example, that if you throw them, they actually behave a little bit differently than if you throw a box. And the bombs, of course, explode after a moment. And so you start stacking up these variabilities in terms of how things move around the level when they're thrown, as well as sort of how they react to other things. And you end up having not just the platformer that you originally had, but sort of like echoes of different versions of that come out of that original platformer idea. So
you can even do stuff like pick up a spring, jump up in the air, throw the spring down. The spring hits the ground, and since it's bouncy, like it has a bouncy behavior when it hits the ground, then you bounce the spring upward, and then you can get like an extra high jump because then you bounce off of it as it's flying through the air. or maybe
Pretty
an enemy.
fancy. Can you throw a bomb underneath it to launch the spring up that you can then bounce off of?
You could do that with a push block. Things don't stand on bombs.
Okay, that makes sense. Probably.
Plus, bombs only last for like 1 second.
Yeah.
So, but you can do stuff like throw a bomb up, and then like when it's on its way down, you jump up past it. Mm-hmm. So now you are above it, and as it explodes, you launch yourself 1,000,000 miles into the air.
Nice.
So you can do all these really cool maneuvers through skill and kind of learning how the mechanics work that just weren't possible before. So we added that, and then we were trying to figure out how to animate this because we have frame by frame animation, tons and tons of stuff. And so Sam, I think it was on Wednesday or Thursday, was working on how to do this, and we couldn't come up with anything that was efficient.
Yeah, so the problem basically becomes if you add one of these motions like late in development, because like the character's not designed to have a thing flying out of them.
We have like 150 animation frames for the character.
So, and most of those are repeats in the different power-up form. So GR18 by himself has like probably 30 frames, I guess, and then you multiply it by 5, right? Because of all the different power-ups.
Yeah.
And so you end up with this combinatorial explosion problem, where you want to be as efficient as possible if you're adding a new action. So with this tow cable, the question basically becomes, okay, in all states, is there a single frame you can use that in all states whether you're falling and you throw it out to the right, whether you're falling and you throw it out up, or you're standing and then you shoot it to the left or down or whatever else?
Well, first we need to explain how it became a tow cable, and this was part of the animation problem, right?
Well, yeah, this is where it comes from. Is like you end up with this position where, okay, if you want to well animate this thing, you can either take the route of saying, okay, we're going to need basically 6 new frames per one power up of these things, or we can just find some sort of alternative solution. So the alternative solution was just to sort of extend a cable from behind the back of GR18. And originally it was like, okay, let's do like sort of like a holographic, like a laser, cool laser hand thing that just grabs onto stuff. And so I made one, and it looked like a skeleton claw.
It was very creepy.
It was very creepy.
It didn't fit the character.
I mean,
at all.
I loved it because it was so creepy, because it was like, what the hell? Like, he's got this weird hologram.
Yeah, Sam is always trying to creep our players out, and then Adam and I have to put the brakes on, and we're like,
dial it back.
Don't.
So it turned into like a goof first, and there was
screen caps, mid grab would have been really, because especially the very beginning when the hand is kind of like
squeezing out,
long and closed still.
Yeah,
it's not open yet. Very good.
Creepy. So then it transitioned into more of like a plunger, which is sort of more appropriate for kind of how GR18 is. Like, he's this ball. He's kind of a squishy sort of. He's a nice character, right? You don't want to have him with a claw grappling things. And so the plunger would fly out, and then it transitioned, and that was still a hologram, and then it transitioned fully into now it's more like a sort of a magnetic tow cable. And then the last iteration of it that I did, I just put GR18's face on it again.
It's got a little face on the end of it.
So it's got a little monitor and a face. So basically, you almost won't see it if you're just playing the game, but in screenshots in particular, you'll see this like screaming happy plunger thing.
Shoot out
people.
Yeah, and so we landed on this tow cable solution so that we wouldn't have to animate. But then that opened up the new idea of, what if you, instead of having to grab stuff that you're right on top of, which is how normally a grab mechanic would work. Well, if we got this cable, then we can actually shoot it out a little ways.
Yeah, you can reach a little bit.
Yeah. And so then all of a sudden, it changes everything. And so just as an experiment, so we made it so that it extends out just a couple of grid spaces in front of you. So you can't go, super far. And it also stops when it hits a solid object. So just as an experiment, I made a puzzle level that is, there's no enemies in it, and it's literally just you have a push block or a throw block at the beginning of the level, and you have to use this block in all kinds of ways to get to the end of the level. So the first thing you have to do is there's an insurmountable stack of spike balls, and there's a push block on the other side of it. And you got to shoot your cable through the gap, like through the spikes, grab the block and pull it through, use it to jump over, reach back across and pull it through again, and then you carry it with you through the rest of the level. And the craziest part is, so we did all this stuff, and then I was playing the level with my wife, because you could do multiplayer. And the multiplayer, once again, changed everything.
Right, because now you can jump off of each other.
Now you can pick up and throw each other. So we did stuff like, I would pick her up, and then I would jump, and then she can jump off my back over the thing that previously I had to use a push block for.
And then she can just grab you and pull you across the spikes.
Yeah.
Right?
And because you can pull you can pull things through things. Then we even had a scenario where she was standing on a pressure plate so that I could walk through a door, right? Well, as soon as she steps off the pressure plate,
The door closes.
the door closes.
Right.
But I could stand on the other side of where the door was, shoot my cable out, and quickly pull her through the door gap before it closed, right? So just by adding this like little tow cable thing, now all of a sudden multiplayer feels very different. Everything feels very different.
Well, actually, and there's a big reason why too, which is so part of it came about while exploring the animation, because the original idea was just to have a single frame grab that was sort of for objects that are right next to you. But as we talked about it became more apparent that doesn't necessarily open up some of these other avenues of play. And that's what we've been really trying to focus on with this game is every single mechanic, not just doing the single job that we ask it to do, which is like, can you grab things? Yes or no? But adding some element of additional play. So the fact that the tow cable comes out a couple of tiles, so 2 or 3 tiles. So it's almost like a lasso then, right? And then also that it takes a little bit of time to do so means that you now have there's a little bit of like a timing game associated with it. Where now, say you want to have some crazy level where you're maybe bouncing some pick-upable object and you shoot the player over something. So like they have to time out when the grapple goes out to grab this thing and pull it back in.
Right, because you could, for example, put a spring over a fan and the spring will be blown up and down, right? So then if you want to catch the spring in midair, then you'll have to time it out and shoot out your cable and catch it.
Right. So it's not just about getting that one job done of like, can the player grab stuff, yes or no? It's like, okay, so yes, the player can grab things, but
how do you make it super fun?
Yeah, can we make it so that there's just play involved in there? And then the fact that it echoes into multiplayer is just so cool. So
yes. So this is I've gone from feeling good about the game to feeling just like this is fucking
real
awesome.
good.
Yeah. And then on top of that, speaking of things that have changed everything. So we had the conversation last week about multiplayer because we added couch co-op. And there's one kind of a weird sore spot with the multiplayer, which is when if you're building a multiplayer level, then you have to beat it with the correct number of players in order to publish it. Which means that if you're building a level for, say, 4 players, then you might have you would need to have 4 players there with you in the room, sort of like as you are tweaking and finalizing and building the level. So this is obviously boring for those other 3 people. If
just to watch you make it and then
just to watch you work
10 minutes or whatever.
Yeah. So we thought, how do we make it so that people aren't just sitting around? And we had the solution is right there, which is to let everybody edit the level at the same time, which is stupid. Probably.
And awesome. It's an invitation for chaos, but in the same way that
so it's just regular
multiplayer
couch co-op.
Yeah. So we decided, let's see what happens.
Yeah. So over the weekend, I did it. Mm-hmm. I had to rebuild the editor completely to allow for basically like 4 channels of inputs and track all the stuff that we used to be tracking now has to be split out, into multiple sort of input channels, and everybody gets their own item selected and their own thing that they're dragging around and stuff like that. So we haven't tested it yet, so we have some work to do, but I think we're going to do it. Because worst case scenario, if people don't like it or they don't want to use it, then they just don't have to.
Yeah, this actually reminds me. So Seth and I played Super Mario Odyssey yesterday, and they break out their co-op in a very interesting way because you can play as either the Hat or as Mario, right?
Yeah.
So that's how the 2 players split. It's not like a Mario and Luigi where you both have equal powers. It's actually like 2 very different things. And the Hat in this case can't be damaged, it just murders things essentially, and then does other interesting stuff.
You basically get to just help.
Yeah,
when you're the Hat.
But also, if you are not doing anything, then the first player still controls like normal. So in other words, if the player who is playing as the Hat decides decided to eat some popcorn.
I was like, I'm going to eat some Cheetos.
It impacted the gameplay not at all because I could still do all of the moves that he was doing.
Right, because Mario can still throw his hat and then it comes back like a boomerang and stuff. But then as soon as I take over, now I'm controlling the hat. Yeah.
So it was this really interesting way of doing this drop in and out multiplayer and there are some times where we're like, oh, I'll just play for a bit. Like I'm just going to do this part. I want to fight this boss or whatever else. And so I think having the ability to like just pop in and out is super cool because in the editor concept you don't actually need 4 people.
No,
it's
probably better to not have.
In fact, it is probably better. It's probably easier to control in the same way that basically any co-op game that splits some of your functions is going to be easier to control as one person. But it's still really fun. So I'm really curious to see kind of how it.
Yeah, I can guarantee. The problem is it's really hard to test because like I can test multiplayer gameplay because the mechanics are pretty straightforward. But testing two people, using controllers in the editor, there's so many possible inputs, and I only have two hands, right? So, and I'm using a controller with one hand, then I need to try to do, because basically most of the problems come when two people try to do the same thing at the same time.
Yep.
Right. So
or two opposing things at the same time.
Yeah. So if I pick up an item and start to drag it across the level, and then you simultaneously drag another item and put that where I started this one from, right?
Yep.
Then things might get weird. Or if we both try to drag the same item to two different places. Right. So there's a few kinds of scenarios that have prolonged interactions.
We'll go break it this morning.
We're gonna just tear it to pieces. Mm-hmm. So I think that's all we got for Levelhead, right? And then otherwise, this past weekend, I streamed development on Twitch again, that's I think the fourth time, something like that. So
that's it's pretty good.
I'm being consistent. I'm really sticking to it.
That's a lot better than our last time using Twitch, which I think was 4 years ago.
Probably, and it was 4 years ago, and I think we streamed playing Depth or something.
Yeah,
but here's the thing. We tried to stream playing games, and we're just not. That's just not who we are. We're not those wild, rambunctious streamers who just.
I can do it in the more of the YouTuber setting where you clip out all the boring parts. Yeah. I think that's super fine. But
I think when we play games, we are boring 98% of the time.
Yeah, because as
is basically everybody. That's why so few people can be successful streamers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because you have to engage with the game and with the audience and stuff. But I can program and then pop in and out of chat and chat with people and stuff. So this past weekend hit 50 concurrent viewers, which is a pretty cool milestone. Mm-hmm. So if you'd like to join in the fun and kind of see just how things come together in a game, it's going to be happening again this Saturday. And all the information is over at twitch.tv/bscotch. So go ahead and check that out. Also, speaking of this weekend, Pixel Pop Festival.
It's happening. Yeah.
It's happening this upcoming Saturday and Sunday, July 28, 29. So that's an event here in St. Louis. I believe it's $30 pre-registration. Don't know what the price is at the door.
Slightly higher.
I'm going to guess 35,
40. I don't know.
70. It's probably $70. Mm-hmm. We don't really know. But yeah, so it's an event to kind of celebrate game developers from the Midwest and kind of what's going on in St. Louis. So if you want to see some of that, there's also talks, lots of demos and
they got quite a few people from just from all over this year too. There's people coming in from New York, I know, and a couple others from
They've got this worldwide Street Fighter champion doing a Q&A.
Cool,
just all kinds of weird, cool stuff. Mm-hmm. And then at least one of us will be wandering around Pixel Pop at some point. So if you come by, come on over and say hello. Mm-hmm. I think that's all the news we have.
Yep.
So let's get on to some questions.
Let's do it.
These questions come from our listeners over at podcast.bscotch.net. First question comes from Challosis. Can y'all share some of the financial details of going indie minus actual numbers? How did y'all support yourselves in the beginning? Side jobs, living at home, etc. Is Crashlands revenue higher or lower than your current burn rate? This doesn't get talked about enough in the industry.
That's probably true.
Yeah.
Most business things don't.
Mm-hmm. No one wants to hear about the numbers for some reason. So, I think to start with, as far as where all this started back 6 years ago, essentially when we left our previous studio to start the company, Seth and I both had set aside money to have basically 6 months of what we understood to be our runway intact. So that, in other words, we could go work for 6 months on Butterscotch stuff and theoretically in that time window make enough money that we would be okay.
Yes, that kind of means figure out, take meticulous notes, put together a budget, and figure out your sort of lowest living expenses. Mm-hmm. Then add 50% on top of that because that's how it normally pans out.
Yeah. So, and that included, that's all the insurances, all that other stuff. So we weren't skimping on the things that a lot of people actually do skimp on, especially in either artistic or independent endeavors where they're like, well, I just won't get health insurance for this year or two.
Although I think we have to also acknowledge that we were coming from a hugely privileged place at that time. Because I think so Sam was definitely under 26, so he was on our parents'
I got to stay on. Well, this also happened this was shortly after the ACA came into effect.
Right.
So the Affordable Care Act in the U.S.
And then Seth, I think
I was supported by my wife.
Right.
Yeah.
So they didn't have to deal with health insurance, which is a huge advantage, and didn't have college debt. Actually, Seth had some.
I had some from law school.
Law school
yeah.
debt, right?
I did not have any college debt at all.
But
I was
I made the
debt-free.
decision to drop out before it got too high.
Yeah. So it wasn't the like $100,000 that.
No, it was more like 20,000.
Yeah. So the burn rates then were, or the like projected
lower than
6 months is actually much lower than most people at this age.
Yeah. Also, we didn't
would be
have children.
Yep.
Which that adds a lot.
And being in St. Louis, the rent was really cheap.
Yeah.
So I think
that's part of the motivation for staying in St. Louis was to
my
keep
apartment
the
I think
burn rate
was $740 a month.
Yep. Yeah. When I was living here before I moved away to do my PhD stuff, I was in a $600 a month apartment. So
Yep.
Yeah, so once you stack all the groceries and everything else on there, of course it goes up. But yeah, we were coming from a phenomenally privileged background in terms of like the ability to start in enterprise when you have debt and a bunch of this other stuff kind of in the background. It's much harder, obviously, because you're essentially your burn rate goes way up. You need to pay off
way up
all this other stuff.
Yeah, so a lot of people might have to bide their time more, kind of save up longer, or pay down their debts more aggressively, that kind of thing. We know some folks who moved to Mexico City to bring their cost of living down by like a 2/3 or something like that.
Way down.
Yeah, so there are a lot of sort of weirder options that you can do to try to put yourself into a better position. But yeah, so the idea there, though, is to try to get yourself into a spot where, whether it's living at home with your parents, supported by a spouse, moving to Mexico City, whatever it is you got to do, you got to understand what your current sort of cash flow issues are.
Yeah.
And then make moves to sort of solidify those, or alleviate any particular rough spot.
And it's also worth noting, this is just one particular model, right? So we were bootstrapped the whole way. So we didn't necessarily we didn't ask for publisher funding. We didn't actually shop around to try to get a publisher or anybody to actually give us money to finish dev.
No Kickstarter.
No Kickstarter thing. And so there are other ways to go about it. One of which is to sort of, while you still have your full-time job or whatever else, is to build up this prototype that's essentially like a visual, especially visually impressive, and then is sort of a vertical slice of the game. And then you can use that for either Kickstarter or to try to reach out and get publisher money from someone. So
right. So there are options. And it doesn't mean sort of starving yourself for 2 years. If you make something that people really want, then you can find publishers and that kind of stuff. So when it comes to burn rate, Crashlands is now at about half. Yeah. Meaning like it's every day we spend twice as much money as Crashlands makes. So burn rate math, I think, is really interesting because it's percentage based. And so, like, let's say we were making 10%. That sounds really bad, right? But here's how the math shakes out. So the way to think about this is, so I'm gonna say the formula. So don't get overwhelmed, because I'm gonna give some examples of how this would look. So to figure out, all you really need to care about with your burn rate is, how many months can I operate? How many months can I sustain at this current level, right? So what you do is you take your cash on hand times your percentage of monthly cash lost. Okay. That's how many months you can operate. So, example, if you have, let's say on all these examples, you're going to have 3 months of cash on hand. Okay. So if you are making 25% per day,
And we say 3 months of cash on hand. You mean you have in the bank,
let's say,
the amount of money that you would spend in 3 months.
Yeah. So let's say it costs you $5,000 a month to run your studio or something like that. Okay. Then you'd have $15,000 in the bank. Okay.
Cool.
So if you're making 25% of your burn rate, meaning like whatever you're spending, you're only making a quarter of that in income. Then you say, okay, then you take 3 months divided by 0.75. Okay. So that's like 1 minus your 0.25. So that means your 3 months becomes 4 months.
Right.
So you get an extra month off of that. If you're making half, then you have double.
Yep.
So if you're making half your money back and you have 3 months of cash in the bank, then your income will get you through another 3 months.
Right.
Then it starts to ramp up really dramatically, though.
Yeah, because it's a non-linear.
It's non-linear, right? So as you get higher up, so
it also means as you get lower, it gets worse too.
Yes.
yeah.
Right.
So if you're making as you get closer to zero, you run out of money way faster.
Yeah.
So if you're if you're making 50% of your income, then you double your sort of current runway.
Which means that for us, we are currently basically doubled our cash in the bank in terms of our runway.
Yeah. If you're making 80% back, each month, then that 3 months becomes 15 months.
Yeah.
Right. So the difference between 50% and 80% is crazy huge.
And the reason for this is because if you think about like where this all ends, is if you're making 100% or more,
then your runway is infinite.
So
as that percentage,
this all has to trend towards infinity.
So it ramps up more and more. So if you're making so from 80% of your income, you got 15 months. If you're making 90% of your income, 30 months. Right. So 50%, you got half a year. 80%, you got more than a year. 90%, you got almost 3 years. Right.
So our overall strategy then has been to
put all the money in the bank.
Yes, to actually
have as much. Yeah, just hoard it like
we
a dragon.
Hoard a large amount of money from Crashlands. Like the game sold 500,000 units and it did very well, but we actually we did not take the money. We mainly just have it in the company for this exact reason, which is that we know that the games take a long time to build, and we also know that we might have a dud. So as excited as we are about Levelhead,
maybe not everybody else is.
This happens all the time, and so it's got to be one of those cases where when this game comes out, though, if it ups our burn rate back to 80%, and we still have money in the bank, then we're not in one of these situations where we're fine now. Okay,
yeah, we don't even have to be. We don't even
if it ups our income. Our burn rate is our that's our expense.
If it ups our daily income,
it doesn't even have to make as much money as Crashlands. It doesn't even have to actually break even on its own cost. It's all about how it impacts this formula.
Yeah. Because honestly, if we get up to 95%,
you basically
then we've got 8 years.
Yeah.
Right. So
just have money.
Yeah. And of course these things all stack. So whenever we launched Levelhead, it's not like the money from Crashlands stops happening.
Right.
And in fact, it might even increase. If more people find out about the studio, right? So the way to think about all these things is the more products you launch, the sort of more opportunities you have to recoup that, your fixed costs, and then they stack on top of each other. They influence each other. And so one of the things you see with a lot of early indie studios is they overinvest in their early projects. So they might spend 3-4 years on their first game, and when they launch the thing, they don't actually have business experience. They haven't developed a whole bunch of marketing strategies. They don't have business partners. They don't have a lot of leverage in terms of being able to pick and choose who their publishers are because they have no reputation. There's all kinds of downsides that come from launching your first game.
Yeah.
And so if you spend a ton of time launching that first one, then you might just have no money left.
Yes.
And then
because you never made any money in the first place.
You never made any money.
You don't have that hoard that you're dividing by your percent burn rate, right?
Yeah.
That's just zero now, which means your runway is always zero until you get a game out.
Yeah. Right. And one of the things that also really helped with Crashlands was Flop Rocket.
Yes. So which we talked about before, but it bears repeating that game came out.
Flop Rocket was a 2-week project.
Yeah. And it got featured by the App Store, and it came out at just a very good moment because Adam had hopped on the studio. And we've been working on the game, I think, for a year and a half at that point.
Adam and I were not being paid. We were both being supported by our wives.
Mm-hmm. I was being paid the bare minimum to cover my costs of being alive in St. Louis, which was, I think, maybe $1,500 a month, something like that.
Sam was getting $1,500 a month.
Just rolling in the dough.
Yeah.
And but again, without having the loans or without having the health insurance payment at that point, because I was on
that was right at your.
It was more than enough, honestly. I was comfortable. So we go from there to, it's been a year and a half in dev, and Adam and Seth haven't seen any cash basically at all. I think probably
at all.
Yeah, I don't think at all.
We're just burning savings.
Yep,
and we're just burning savings or basically being supported by the spouses. And then Flop Rocket came out, and that allowed us to. That basically got us the extra at least 4 or 5 months of dev on Crashlands to really to actually comfortably finish the thing out.
Yeah, and it was the case that when Crashlands launched, I think we had $200 in the bank.
Yeah,
I mean it was that was
$200.
$200. Yeah, it was. We were right down to the end there.
Yeah.
Well, that was part of why we launched when we did. Is we had to launch as soon as possible. There was still an infinite list of stuff that we kind of wanted in the game. There were some bugs that we knew weren't fully worked out, but were worked out enough probably.
Just didn't have any time left.
Just didn't have any time left to get that thing out.
Yeah. So I think this is an interesting point that this doesn't get talked about a lot. I think part of it too is there aren't actually a lot of studios that are fully independent in the sense that they've got no loans, no investors, no publishers, none of that stuff. And so this actually puts us in a position where we aren't jeopardizing any sort of confidential information by talking about.
Yeah, most studios probably have NDAs in place with any. They literally can't talk about it. Yeah. So that's why the funding oftentimes is this very mysterious thing. Unless you're in the industry and you get to get drinks with someone, and they might talk to you about here's how our model works, whatever. But generally, you're not going to hear it on a podcast or anything like that as far as how everything works. Yeah.
And also there's I think a lot of people go into games because they love video games, not because they love business. Mm-hmm. And there's a supply and demand question when it comes to these conversation topics, which is a lot of people actually don't want to talk about it because they're sort of allergic to the conversation.
Yeah, well, I think it's actually money is one of the hardest discussions even for, in marital relationships. It's also one of the things that friends just don't even talk about. People will talk about their sex lives, but they won't talk about how their finances are doing, right? Because it's a weird thing that people just don't, you don't want to step on it. And also most people have money issues, right? It's it's just hard to have money.
It's hard to manage it. It's hard to make it.
Yeah. It just flies out, especially with all the student loans and stuff these days. It's hard to just have money on hand. So I think it's as a business, then you have not just your own personal finances, but then the business finances, which are a whole nother beast.
Yeah. So but I appreciate that question. It's a good question. All right, next question comes from Samantonio. Do y'all have any brain hacks you use to stay positive and keep new ideas flowing? Your themes are often reminiscent of childhood, which I imagine is partially a result of working with your siblings. But are there things you guys like to do individually that helps keep your inner child alive?
So stay positive as it's related to cruising on projects?
I think
or
probably just in life, maybe.
Mm-hmm. I think the general one I have is that if I notice that I feel like I have too much to do, I just can't be still or whatever, because oh God, I gotta go run around, do all this stuff. That's actually when I force myself to go just do something else. So it's because the reality is usually you're fine, you have enough time, and if you don't, then at least this has happened to me before, where you have all those things to do and then you just take a nap. Right? Where you're like, oh God, there's this huge list. And then you're
so when you say go do something else, that doesn't include taking a nap.
No, I mean purposefully. Well, it could, but purposely just basically put the brakes on and say, I'm going to go play the Switch for an hour or whatever the heck, because I just got one of those. So, or I'm going to go for a walk with my wife, or just go see some friends or something like that. And so, just taking that forced time break, I think, kind of helps dilate your time frame a little bit, and then better understand how all these pieces kind of fit together, at least for me personally. So that's been a big one.
Yeah, I think for me it was very different. It has nothing to do with my childhood at all. It's actually kind of exactly the opposite, which was I had to surmount a handful of existential crises and get on the other side. And those were the fact that there will always be people better than me at stuff. Mm-hmm. And that once you just decide that that's true, then and you get on the other side, that you basically now have two options. One is you just say, well, then who gives a shit about what I'm doing, right? The other one is say, who gives a shit about other people? And so you can easily take the wrong path there. And I actually think most people do.
It's just a fork in the road.
It's a fork in the road. But if you get over that hump where it stops bothering you, and then you take the correct fork where you now say, cool, I can just do my own thing.
Because no one cares.
Because no one cares about what you're doing, and there will be people who are better than you. That's just how the world works. Then now you just get to go do your own thing without the worries of what other people think about that. And so you take the same idea to kind of the other existential crisis, which is that you can't know anything. So you're just wrong about everything. Like all of your beliefs, all of your ideas, like everything's just wrong. At least at some level.
And especially before you've really done the thing.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Right. So anything you think you know about something that you haven't actually got your hands into, you're 100% wrong about.
As opposed to 90%.
As opposed to just
like an expert.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And again, that's a thing that once you get over the other side of that hump, you can either then give up and just say, well, then what's even the point of trying to know anything? Mm-hmm. Or you can say, cool, this sets me free to not have to worry about it. So you can still go experiment and still search and still try to become better and more knowledgeable, but you no longer have to worry about the fact that you don't know what's going on. So I have a collection of these existential crises that I got over and then took what I believe were the correct fork on the other side. Because almost everybody takes the wrong fucking fork if they make it over that.
So I want to say, so Adam submitted a talk to GDC that was basically this. The talk was called "Everybody is Wrong About Everything All of the Time." For some reason, they didn't want to hear that.
I don't know. Didn't want it,
so that got rejected. But Adam gave.
I was really pumped about giving that talk.
Adam gave internally in the studio gave a talk. It was about an hour and a half or so about all the ways in which you're just wrong about.
It was basically about the kind of the philosophy of evidence and how we understand the world and why, as a consequence of those things, we don't actually get to know anything.
Yeah, and my favorite takeaway from that is the idea that your brain is not meant to portray an accurate representation of the world.
No.
Your brain is built to portray a useful interpretation of the world.
Yep, and that's useful to your brain, being the brain of a monkey.
Right. The brain of a weird, smooth monkey.
Yep.
So for example, when we see color, what you have to understand is that color doesn't really exist in the way like it's a perception that we have of wavelengths of light
that are being bounced off of a thing.
That are being bounced off of a thing. And so when we
Which is pretty weird though, because it has nothing to do with the thing.
Right. So when we say like, oh, that thing is blue. No, it isn't. We don't know what the fuck it is.
But you certainly perceive it as such.
All you can say is, all you can say is, I see blue coming off of that thing.
Yeah.
And that's all you can actually say. You actually can't make any declarative statement about something being blue.
And even if you did, that doesn't you don't know what that means.
That doesn't mean
one blue
anything.
thing versus another blue thing. Why are they blue? And what other colors are there that you can't see?
Kind of like that dress on the internet that caused firestorms. Everyone's like, is it blue or was it gold or black? I can't remember what the other color was. But
I just remember that my wife and I did see them oppositely.
Yeah, but then even weird stuff like when people learn how to draw, they always draw lines.
Yep.
Right? Because when you're seeing things, you don't see lines. Like if you see somebody standing against a wall or something, you don't see like black outlines around their body or whatever. But conceptually, your brain is putting outlines around things. It's
parsing out things that it identifies as objects. Because
there's actually
your brain is a collection of categorizing stuff.
Right. It sees a collection of shapes and colors that it represents, like that it looks like a person, because it has this idea of what a person looks like.
And there's a weirder theory about how people draw. Based on this, actually, which is that people draw based on their sense of touch, not based on sight, which is why a lot of the times when they talk about when you're training as a new artist, you're not actually training your mechanical hands. Like if you know how to write, you can physically draw. The problem is that you can't see. You literally cannot see in the way that is necessary to be able to render an object on a 2D plane, because the way that you see things is more so about how they feel. And so,
well, it's about how useful they are in whatever context you see them in.
Well, no, I mean this is literally about like the idea that if you were to draw a simplified face, most people draw like this weird sort of, you draw like a circle and then you draw these weird eyes, right, and then like a line for the nose and a line for the mouth. But if you were to draw them as you actually see them as a simplified face, then you would actually just draw sort of the shading of the face. You wouldn't draw lines. And so there's this big idea that and if you watch babies, like babies do this thing all the time, like they pick up an object and they're staring at it and they're just like rubbing it, right? You just rub all over it, because what's actually happening is that you're using your eyes to detect what something feels like physically. So that's why things can feel, you can see hardness in an object, you can see softness in an object, and it's all based on light and all this other stuff. And so there's this idea in a lot of the sort of teaching art communities that the biggest hurdle for people to get over when it comes to drawing is, again, so changing this reality of your perception from your brain is perceiving objects in terms of how they feel to touch. And then that's what you're rendering on the paper, which is why your stuff looks so freaking weird and hideous, is because it's not how you see it. It's how you're
not portraying a visual representation of it. You're portraying
basically a weird touch-based,
like a weird synesthetic combination of touch and feel.
It's that, or it's that what you're drawing is the sort of abstract, objectified in the meaning of like converting into objects kind of way. Because what your brain is actually doing
is usually,
is converting the world around you into a collection of objects that have a bunch of information in your brain just stored away about them. So if you're looking around a room and you see a microphone, because like I can see just 3 microphones right now, but why can I see this? Because I know what microphones are. My brain has this category of microphone. It knows what it looks like. And it has all these things about what I'm supposed to be behaving like around microphones. Like all these things are now just happening in my brain because these objects exist. So when you sit down and draw something like a microphone, you're not going to conjure up like an exact image of one microphone and then draw that thing. what you're going to do is you're going to conjure up the abstract object that is a microphone, and you're going to draw that, which is just going to be a fucking outline.
Yeah.
Right? Like
Well, it's also the case that they refer to them as like getting away from just drawing symbols is one of the hardest things early on. Like if your eyeballs always look like those weird cartoon eyeballs because you can't like
you're
break away.
just capturing sort of, you've got like a couple of check boxes.
Yeah, you've got like an abstract icon of an eyeball, and that's actually what you're drawing. You're not drawing whatever eyeball you're seeing. You're drawing that in place of it. And so that's why all of the faces that people tend to start early drawing just look kind of the same in this weird kind of cartoonish thing.
And something you told me a while ago about the concept of same face.
Yeah.
Which
talk
about that.
The same sort of idea, which is that oftentimes once people get a little bit into their drawing practice, they'll finally be able to like draw an eye, like one type of eye.
They've mastered drawing that eye.
That particular eye. So there's no longer the iconified one. So it looks like an actual eyeball maybe.
But it's that one.
But it's just that one. And then the same thing happens with like the nose and the mouth and just the overall proportions of the face. And so they get the symptom or the syndrome that people refer to as same face, which is, you might have like a bunch of these different characters.
They all have the same
but
face.
They just have the same face. Like they get different hair, maybe like earrings or whatever else, but it's the same face all over the place.
Yep.
So that's where that deliberate practice comes from, of recognizing, holy crap, I've been drawing the same face on every person.
Yeah.
Just
Well,
different
Well, then
hair.
also then learning how, because again, like what you've learned how to draw isn't eyes, like you're saying, because eyes are an abstract idea, right? You've actually started to represent an eye, a specific eye. In order to be able to draw many of them, you have to change your abstraction of them. Either change your abstraction so that your abstraction includes all the details and the variation of what eyes could be, or you just have to now have a whole like list of specific eyes that now live in your brain that you can conjure up.
Well, my favorite thing is that if you look at like one of the best early art practices to prove that you can draw, if you haven't ever drawn before, is just to take a picture and then turn it upside down. And then draw that.
That helps a lot.
Because because your brain just shuts the hell up. Like it stops trying to put these weird iconified things.
Brain's like, oh, that's a house. Your brain's like, I have no.
It's upside down. I have no idea what this is.
I've never seen it. I've never seen anything like
so
this.
It stops trying to abstract what you're looking at and lets you just see the thing.
Yeah.
It lets you just see the lines and see the shading.
Exactly.
And just fully represent.
That's a good brain hack.
Oh, it's awesome. But so as far as these other ones is for, keeping an optimistic attitude and stuff, I think beyond the usuals of like really. For me, like my life, I think has really positively changed since I tried to be way more forceful about getting my sleep, controlling my caffeine intake, and then like planning for 5 minutes every morning.
Sleep helps a shitload.
There's a couple of things. Yeah, you just kind of – things are just better when those three things are kind of happening. So I don't know if it's a life hack per se, but maybe it is.
I think
it's just like playing by the rules.
Yeah, I think
the
a lot of
opposite of a
life
hack.
a lot of them are just doing what you were supposed to have been doing.
Probably,
all along.
yeah.
Stop not doing what you're supposed to be doing.
Don't eat too much. Exercise sometimes.
Stop eating when you're full.
Sleep.
Yeah.
Be nice to people.
Yeah, I think for me, something that I've sort of learned slowly over the years is to fully embrace the idea of you're not bad at stuff, you just haven't put enough time in, and recognizing that as long as you make a conscious effort to put time into whatever it is, then over the years, you just get there, right?
Yeah.
So if you're putting in an hour a day or if you're putting in a half hour a day, then that means in a given year, you're getting like 170 hours of whatever that thing is, 10 years from now, you will have 1,000 hours of whatever.
Yeah.
And then somebody else who didn't put in those 30 minutes, you're now 1,000 hours of expertise ahead of them, right? And so like these little things just add up a lot. And then people see that and they go, oh my God, how are you so good? And they don't want to hear.
Just like what we talked about in the podcast ago. So like, what would you tell your younger art self, right?
It wouldn't matter.
It wouldn't matter.
Yeah.
I wasn't ready to accept the fact that the only way to get better is to spend some time doing the damn thing.
Yeah, and stop focusing so hard on being good at the thing and getting perfect results and just focus on just doing it.
I think my other life hack, which is a good one from my Saturday this weekend. So I had like a big list of stuff to try to tackle around the house, and it happened to be all this stuff that actually you can't probably actually do in one go. So, for example, I was like reorganize my drawing room upstairs, and in the process of doing that, I threw a few things out. And realized that I don't want my bookshelf anymore. So now I need to like sell that thing somehow. And then realized that I probably need a little rug or something in there. So I can't do those things. I was able to prep the space and then realize that I now have this list of 40 other tasks that came about from doing this thing. and I cleaned up my yard. Like I weeded the yard. That was an easy one and done thing. But then the rest of it, now I have this huge pile of brush that I somehow need to get away from my property, but I don't have a truck. So I got to figure out how to do this. And so on Saturday evening, I felt like, I was like, oh man, like I didn't get any of this stuff done. Like I spent hours.
You got a whole bunch of other stuff done.
Well, I think this was the
preliminary stuff.
Exactly. I was focused on the result again, which is I need this outcome to happen. And the reality was actually I had moved all of these projects about 8 hours forward.
Yeah. If your goal changes to, make as much meaningful progress as possible toward these goals, as opposed to just meeting the goals.
Yeah. And it's a trap I fall into personally all the time. I think it's always been sort of my personal psychological hindrance is just if the thing isn't completed, then I get bummed about the fact that I've spent X amount of time in it without that completion happening. And so switching that focus literally made it so Saturday evening I was like, oh, this is not a very good day. And my wife was like, what are you talking about? You did like blah, blah, all these projects moved forward. And I was like, actually, it's a really good day.
Honestly, I think there's something that I think would help almost anyone, which is to pick up a sport.
Yeah.
Because the feedback is so immediate. And in most cases, like people get weird about things like art or math or whatever, but nobody jumps into a swimming pool. Like maybe they don't know how to swim. They jump into a swimming pool and they get out upset that they aren't going to the Olympics that day. Right? Like you just sit there and you're like, yeah, that was really fucking hard. But I'm learning.
It's somehow understandable that you have to be bad at physical things before you can be good at them.
Yes.
Right.
You can see just how bad you look swimming. Like you're flailing around, you're choking, you're drowning, people are rescuing you.
Yeah, and with star athletes, while we all know they might have something extra going on for them, we still know that mostly it's just they put in more work than almost anybody else.
Yeah.
And why is it that we all know that?
We all know
the physical things, but yeah, it's weird.
I think it's because you can't see it.
You can't see what's going on in other people's minds.
Yeah. If there was a physical representation of just how hard you were working when you were doing something like coding or drawing, because like it looks like you're doing literally nothing.
Yeah. So we need like a brain meter.
You need a brain meter. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's the case that, a lot of times employers talk about how they love hiring athletes. They love hiring people who are college athletes and stuff because they
know how to work.
They know how to just they have an intuitive sense that things really suck a lot for a long time until you get really good at it, right? And then
even when you get really good at it, it's still just a lot of work.
Still is a lot of work.
You don't get to ever just take a break,
right? You're not like I'm really good at football now. Now I don't have to make any effort, and I'm just at the Super Bowl. Like, no, you still have to work way harder than everybody else, right? And so there's something about athletics that I think sort of taps into that because it's so easy to see it. It's so easy to understand it. And so if you haven't done...
Well, I think there's another part of it too, though, that might be as or even more important than just the seeing it, which is that in athletics, you have a coach.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what a coach's job is to instill habits into you against your will.
Mm-hmm. Right. Because you're not going to do it.
Because you're not going to do it. And so if you...
They're a parent. They're parenting you through this.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And so that when you get on the other side of it, then you've seen the outcome of all of this. So when your parents, when you're young, say like, you'll understand when you're older why this was a good idea, right? And you're fighting tooth and nail. And maybe someday you actually do see. And a coach is exactly the same way. It's they're forcing you to do all this stuff that hurts and it sucks, and you kind of abstractly know that it's good for you and that the end result is going to be good, but you actually don't. Like the feedback isn't that tight. You don't see on a day-to-day basis at all that you're improving, and like it's that's on a week to a month basis, right? So I think having a coach is probably much more important conceptually than just like
or even a partner, or if you join a league or something like that. Where there's other people who are good at the thing and you can see them and talk to them about it and stuff like that.
Yep. Or hire a coach or be involved in a thing that has coaching in it. That's not a sport, but that has something to do with what you care about.
Yeah.
Right?
So even something like, there's a thing called masters swimming where different cities have different chapters of master swim programs. And oftentimes they'll put together a pre-built workout, it's like you're not going to make your own workouts really hard.
Yep.
Why would you do that? It hurts. But if somebody else says like, yeah, here's what you have to do today. You're like, well, shit, I mean, I guess
right.
I guess I must do
This
it.
is the beauty of something like CrossFit. You just show up and they're like, do all these horrible things to yourself. And you're like, I guess. Fine. Okay.
Yeah. And the crazy thing about all this stuff is CrossFit in particular, a lot of the movements that they do are meant to be functional movements that you don't need a lot of equipment to do. Right? It's like anybody could just like,
Yeah,
get
you can make your own wad.
Yeah, get one of those like $20 pull-up bars, slap that into your
Mm-hmm.
doorway somewhere, grab a sandbag and start throwing it around your garage, and like that's CrossFit, right?
Yep.
Nobody's doing that. Instead, they're paying $100 whatever a month to go have somebody tell them to do it.
Because what you're paying for is the habit formation and people forcing you to do things against your will.
Yeah. And that's not to be discounted because it means everything.
Yeah.
You know, like that's the whole point of it. All right. We got time for one more question. Question comes from imcade. Have you ever had a mentor?
Yes.
Sam did.
I did.
Does.
I do.
Did and do.
Yeah, I think I've had probably two of them. First one was my statistics professor in college. And it's funny because I got like a B. I mean, I wasn't like a standout student, but I was way more interested in it than most of the students were, if that makes sense. So my final project I did on, it was a stats analysis of global agenda, which I think Adam helped me with. I think we built a web script. Remember this?
Yeah, I forgot about that.
So I called Adam and I was like, all right, I need a shitload of data, but I can't get it. So I need you to build a web scraper for me.
When was this?
This is in 2010 or 11.
Shit.
I remember Global Agenda was popular on 2010.
Yeah, so this is
it was like a shooter MMO.
Yeah, class-based PvP game, okay? And so my question
From
was...
High-Res Studios.
Yes, my question was, can you answer the question with stats? What's the optimal team composition? So there's usually 5-man teams or 10-man teams. So looking at because they basically every single game that was played was published as the results of it, the stats as far as who killed how many people, etc. And so the question was, can we just take at a basic level the different classes that are in a match? How many of those? Like, what's the optimal number of medics to have? Like the rogue class to have, etc. And the funniest part was the only thing I could say about it. Like the only thing that came out was that the more of the rogues that you had,
the worse you did.
And I think it actually was because of the mentality. Yeah, they were the one class that like they could just kind of go murder stuff by themselves.
They're a class that has no team based skills, and the type of player who chooses that class possibly is somebody.
I think it would tend to trend toward more of a solo person, right?
Yeah. It's like a glass cannon with stealth, and they either snipe or they get up and do melee stuff, but they're not with the team.
Yeah, and so I was completely shocked by this. And I was also cracking up because that was the class that I played. And I was like, oh, I need to make a change. But yeah, so I did that study, and I think because I did it on a thing I was interested in, because I had Adam help me with the stats collection, like it was just a fun. I was just way more interested in the stats than because of that.
Yeah, it turns out most of when you learn stats, they're giving you like boring ass business, like business expense reports and things like that. Where you're like,
someone's like, and then if they said, "What if you picked a rogue? Is that the right choice? If you want to win more matches?"
Yeah. So this is Professor Eli Sneer is the guy's name, and he's also he's got like a really dry wit, and so he and I would just kind of banter a little bit. So yeah, I mean, I got to be in his class, but then I would occasionally show up there. You know, because we did some stats work both in the studio. We've done all sorts of weird stuff as far as the data we've gotten from our players. And so every so often I just fire him a question over whatever else. And so he was sort of like a really light mentor because I think he again sort of cracked open the stats as like a fun thing that I could do just as an interesting activity as opposed to strictly in a business sense.
That reminds me of I in my econometrics course in my undergrad, I did a economic study trying to discern if there was a cultural difference between Horde and Alliance players in World of Warcraft, because they have access to all of the same. At that time, they had access to all of the same parts of the game, all the same character classes, everything. And so the question is there a difference? Is there a measurable difference in what those players are doing, sort of in their activities, right? And so I found that Horde players had an average of 250 more achievement points than Alliance players, out of maybe like 5,000 achievement points. So it was a significant amount, and they were largely focused on player versus player achievements, right? So like the Alliance players would get, and this is an interesting question because player versus player is also a zero-sum game, right? So if one team wins a lot and the other team loses a lot, then of course the winning team is going to get more achievements.
Yep. Yeah.
And also the other team is going to be discouraged from participating.
Yeah.
Right. So,
so it's also got a feedback loop.
So it creates an interesting feedback loop. So that was, this is the kind of stuff that I wish there was more opportunities to do this kind of stuff in college.
Yeah. I loved that project. It was one of my favorite ones. And so the other mentor I had was sort of around the same time, actually, was was this guy, Troy, who was the design mentor I had, who ended up sort of getting me into web development, which is what sort of got me into programming at the end of the day, and then into game design.
Which is what got you into an internship, which started the game jam in St. Louis, and then Butterscotch Shenanigans.
Yep. So that was this weird snowball effect that happened out of that. And I think the big thing for having a mentor is just I've tried to always maintain that I in those positions where I get an opportunity or in class or something like that is just try to maintain that you're absolutely there to learn stuff. And I think people can pick up on whether or not you're actually showing up to like with an open sort of mind to get the material. And speaking from our own experience as being teachers, you can basically spot those kids day one. Which ones are like showing up to really be there?
Which ones are not sleeping?
Yeah, also
just all these subtle things that you pick up on when you're in the front of the class.
And I remember, Troy had mentioned that part of the reason he and I ended up getting along so well is because it was a class of like 12 or 15 people, and there's a bunch of computers in the room. So everyone actually sat at a computer desk by default, and then the projector was projecting stuff up on the screen. And I was the only student who would just sit there with facing directly toward the projector
and not looking at the computer.
Never looking at my computer. And he said I was always just ramrod straight. Like my posture was just 100% straight, and I was just looking at stuff just all the time. And so it made an impression on him, and then we started chatting, and then he offered me a little gig doing some HTML stuff, even though I couldn't, and then that sort of snowballed into.
I will say, I hadn't taught a legitimate course until we taught that game dev course at WashU, and as a student, you're so self-absorbed.
Oh my God!
Yeah.
That
I feel so bad about my
because it's just another class. Yeah. It's just another class. Who cares? I've got five other classes.
Is this really even valuable to you?
Is this even valuable?
You've got drinking to do.
Yeah, I've got much more important things that are going to shorten my lifespan to take care of. And so, I can think back on my college, going into class and, not making eye contact with the professor while they're talking about things, being generally disinterested in various topics. And you just don't think about the fact that this professor, like, this is their thing.
Yeah.
Like they're fucking pumped about their whole life is teaching this subject, and it matters a lot to them. And they just might have something fucking awesome to share with you.
Right. Yep.
Right? I mean, and of course that doesn't always come across because not everybody has a good stage presence.
Well, but also if you're a teacher long enough and see people not giving a shit for long enough, there's a pretty good chance you just get jaded and then you don't put in the work anymore.
Yeah. And so, being on the other side of that and seeing just how unbelievably easy it is standing at the front of the room to see who gives a shit and who doesn't.
Yeah.
Like you as a student, you think that nobody's noticing you in the back row with your head down.
Everybody knows if you're texting.
God. It is so obvious.
The professor knows if you're texting or if you're on Facebook. You could tell.
It's
so obvious. It's unbelievably obvious.
There's no way to hide it.
No.
Yeah. So that was a very interesting experience.
Yeah. Did you guys ever have any mentorship figures?
I had. Not in the same way that you did, in that it was a person I sort of identified as a mentor, but since I went through a sort of pre-science career, then that includes a sort of well-defined hierarchical mentor-mentee relationship. And so I had that, but that's much more of a sort of
it's like a
almost vocational, kind of what's the right word? Like apprenticeship style, right? And so that I had people who were very like one-on-one directly responsible for my education and the kinds of thinking that I had and so on. But at the same time, it was because it was structural, it wasn't like a thing that we all opted into, So
it's not kind of relationship building.
Yeah. And so I had perfectly good relationships with all those people and got a lot out of those things. But they aren't people that I like. If somebody asked me the question like, did you have any mentors? I don't point to those people and say like, yes, those were them. Because it just felt much more like we were all doing our jobs. Right. And it was good. Like we got a lot of good stuff out of it, but it was really just that.
Mm-hmm. So I'll say I had two. I think what makes a good mentor is somebody who doesn't put up with your bullshit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
or who's really good
which is true whether it's structural.
Yeah. Yes. Or I don't mean that in a negative way.
No, because they can be very good. It's like Troy was very good at, you would maybe dump a bunch of grievances on him, and then he would take it and very nicely somehow like repackage it and be like, this is your problem.
This is your problem. Yeah. And so I think the two people who have kind of affected me the most, and when I say people don't put up with your bullshit, it's that every single one of us, it's a human tendency to try to find ways out of doing stuff.
Yeah.
It's like doing things is hard, and all we want to do is whine about it, you know?
Yep.
And a good mentor is somebody who comes in and just reminds you that nobody cares.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody cares how upset you are about doing this amazing thing that will make you better, right? Just shut up and do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had my swimming coach who taught me about all kinds of things like, you know, being able to visualize what you're going to be doing and kind of putting down a plan and putting together a good, you know, like more of like a whole life approach to what it is that you're doing. Because, you know, if I went to swimming and I still just was like eating garbage all the time and I wasn't also like lifting weights or doing other things to keep my life in order, or even things like focusing on academics. Because if I am failing my classes, then I'm not eligible to swim,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so there's all these things that kind of wrap up into being a good member of the swim team, you know? And he kind of taught me how to take that sort of higher level view of just doing good work.
And when he complained, he did not give a fuck.
He didn't give a shit. He was this, you know, 6'4" dude with the long hair, big beard, and he had this look.
Oh yeah, he looks scary.
Yeah.
He looked.
He's a scary dude.
Yeah, he wore, and he was this kind of mythical figure because we also knew that he had a farm.
Mm-hmm.
He also worked a normal day job. And he was the coach for the swim team.
Was he even paid for that, or was he?
I think
it's a tiny amount.
He was paid like $1,000 or something,
just like-
Which almost
to
at that
coach
point,
swimming
like-
for $3.
Yeah.
And we had swimming at 6 o'clock in the morning, 6 to 7 a.m. He was always there, no matter what the weather. Like he never canceled a practice.
Never sick.
Yeah. And his rule was, if I can get to practice, it's not canceled. And
he lived 15 miles out of town.
He lived 15 miles out of town on
Yeah.
a farm, and the roads didn't get plowed or anything. And so every now and then there'd be a huge blizzard. There he was. There he was at
Fucking
practice.
matter.
How? I
Yeah.
don't know.
And so he kind of set this example of just shut up. Just
Shut up and
quit
do the work.
whining about everything. Just
Yeah, but
do
when,
it.
When it
you
comes
know?
back to the whole self-absorption thing, right? I didn't think of, because I saw him as that mythical figure, but I didn't actually think of him as a person. you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
With all, because all the stuff you're talking about, that was a person who decided that swimming was important.
He has all the same
and
fucking
instilling-
problems
yeah,
as we do.
right? And,
you know?
and instilling, good behavior and healthy habits, all this kind of stuff into young, douchey people, right? Teenagers who were just super self-absorbed. That was really important, and so he's going to dedicate. And he went basically, effectively as a volunteer, he was going to wake up and he had to figure this stuff out because we didn't have a swimming pool in high school. We had to borrow the college's pool for like this 1 hour window where they would let us. And he had to fight them to let us do. So like there was all these battles he was like going on our behalf,
And he never told us about it.
he never told us about it.
Never whined about it.
Never whined about anything. And as a consequence, like I didn't even think of him as a person. And so all the stuff that he like
You got all your normal person problems, and then
Right.
here he is, just like a rock.
he's just a guy
he's just a force of
Right.
nature,
Yeah,
just always there. You know,
And I think there are some downsides to that actually, which is that again, like if you don't see a person as a person,
You
know,
can't be them.
then you can't be them, and you can't actually it's much easier to see them as an obstacle or as something that's creating problems for you than because this is the same way I saw professors when I was again like speaking of the self-absorption, right? Is I didn't see my professors as people until like the end of college and really until grad school, because then I interacted with them one-on-one as people. But before that, it was just a person up in the front of the room who seemed to know so much more than me that it was like just a different.
they're like a weird alien that
Yeah,
came
exactly.
down, and
Right.
you're like, I don't think we live on the same planet.
They try to make you do stuff, and you're like, no,
Yeah.
I don't want. I don't want it.
I
They're
wanna
like,
do
It
this
will be
stuff.
very good for you if you do this.
And then I think my second person was my finance professor. So what happened was I was going to school for economics with a marketing sort of minor, and then this really interesting looking dude came into one of my accounting classes. And he had just like white hair and dark skin, so he had like this really awesome contrast. He's from Bangladesh, and he comes in and he just has this very commanding presence, and he's just like, how many of you know about the CPA exam? And everybody's like, oh yeah, we know about that. That's the public accountant thing to become a certified accountant. And he's like, how many of you know of the CFA? And nobody knows what he's talking about. And he says, the CFA is the CPA for people who want to retire when they're 35. If you'd like to know about this, come to my office. And that was his whole pitch.
That's so mysterious.
I was like, I want to know about this. And I had one semester left.
It sounds like a scene in a movie.
It does.
Yeah. And so I had one semester left, and it had just worked out that I only had one class left to take that happened to be a finance class, right? In order to get all my credits to graduate. So I was like going to spill over to the next semester, and I needed something to fill the time. So I went down to his office, and I'm like, tell me about this thing. And he says, it's one of the hardest exams. The failure rate is about 80%.
Awesome.
And in order to pass it, you only need to get a 70%. So you can still miss almost a third of the questions and pass it. And still, most people can't do it. And so he says, if you want to take this, you're going to have to take every high-level finance course that we have next semester. I was like, I'm not a finance major. He's like, you better become one. Because
Again, not putting up with your shit, right?
He's like, because if you want to do this, then you got to do it.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, shit. So I went to my advisor. I declared a finance major, and I picked up every single high level finance course all at once, including intermediate finance, because I hadn't taken that yet even. So I had one semester where this guy was my professor for every class. So I couldn't escape him. And I just saw in every single class, he was just fucking relentless. Like he was very clear and fair and direct, but he just didn't put up with anybody's nonsense about anything. So it was very much like the swim coach, right?
Yeah.
People kept trying to find ways around it, and he just didn't give an inch.
Mm-hmm.
So I think having somebody, and then I ended up taking the CFA exam, and I passed it. But I would not have been able to do that without this guy.
Yeah. It's usually a thing people train for like 3 years to go take, right?
Yeah.
You did it in like 4 months.
4 months.
Yeah.
But again, it wasn't
you.
It wasn't
you
me.
Plus the guy.
It was me having this person who just didn't let me get out of it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So I think if you find somebody like that, then you got to make sure that you acknowledge how special that is.
Well, I think actually, there's also, and we talked about this a bit, maybe not on the podcast, but there's also kind of a related idea of sort of an anti-mentor, right? Because you're talking about this guy doing all this stuff, right? And it reminded me of my, in college, we had advisors who would, tell us whether we were on the right path, taking good class loads, all that kind of stuff. When I decided I wanted to do biology, I was like, okay, I've got finite time here because I was going to graduate in 4 years, whatever. And so I just wanted to pack it. I wanted to do like just everything in one go. And I wanted to get into like the high level chemistry and the high level biochemistry. And I wanted to get into all that stuff as fast as I could. So I started taking these max loads we were on a quarter system. So every quarter I would take a max load, all like the hard science classes, and then when I first laid out what I wanted to do to my advisor, she was like, no, you really shouldn't do this. Like you're going to burn out. This is going to be too hard. And you're not going to be able to succeed doing this, And I was just like, fuck you, like, so I had somebody basically acting as an antagonist, as basically telling me I couldn't do it,
That is true. You do need an opposing force.
Yeah.
So somebody to prove wrong.
Yeah. And so that was my best semester or my best quarter of my whole college career was that one. Right?
Somebody told you can't.
Yeah. She told me I couldn't do it. And I was like, I'm gonna do this.
You know why? It's because every time you start fucking around, that voice comes in the back of your head. Like, you can't do it. And you're like, fuck you. Right. I'm going to get it done.
And that's something on a course for the rest of my college, because that was probably my second year of college when that sort of started. The rest of my college career, I was buried in books and coursework the entire time.
That's when that
was when my eyes gave up. Like everything, my whole body just disintegrated.
Yeah, you became a skeleton.
Yeah, but I learned a bunch of stuff.
You can always get your muscles back later.
Yeah, when you're young, you can. When you get it's
harder when you get older.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's all the time we have for this week. We'd like to thank our producer, Fat Bard, for making us sound good. Thanks to our community moderators who keep we'll just say Discord running. If you'd like to get more involved in the Butterscotch community, hop into our Discord server, which is over at discord.gg/bscotch, and come say hello. We're usually lurking around in there at various points in the day. Also, if you'd like to adorn your body with Butterscotch merch, you can check out our shop over at shop.bscotch.net. We've got mugs, shirts, stickers, posters, you name it. As long as it's one of those four things, it is in our shop.
Yep.
Also, if you'd like to send us something, we have a mailbox, which you can find the address for over at mailbox.bscotch.net. Finally, if you'd like to buy us a cup of coffee, you can head on over to moneygrab.bscotch.net and give us a donation to help support the podcast. We appreciate it tremendously. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Goodbye.
Bye.